bit more about that later in the lesson. Anyway, so how many of you have been electrocuted in here? 1, 2. Okay, well, I was just the other day. Thursday evening, I was working on my trailer. I was hooking up batteries and all that stuff, and I know better than to do this because I've been hooking up batteries forever, and I always take off my rings when I do that. And the other night, I was in a hurry, and I thought, I know what I'm doing. I'll be careful, and this won't bother me. And, man, I got caught between terminals, and that thing shocked me. And, when those things say they put out like 130 cold cranking amps, they do. It burned my finger. I had a ring around my finger. It lit it on fire, put a blister all the way around my finger. I'll have a nice little scar for that. Burned my head, turned my hair white. Yeah. And not only that, the reason I'm telling you this is that you'll probably notice when I'm looking around, I'm not going to be turning my head like this because I can't do it this way. I'm going to be doing this. Because it pulled a muscle in my back and in my neck. I mean, really bad. And I thought, what did I do? And then I was telling my wife, I said, I shocked myself. That's why this is all messed up. And so, but I'm like about probably 50%, 70% better than I was Friday and Saturday as well. Anyway, so that's what. So if all of a sudden I make a wrong move and you see me wince, I'm not spazzing out. Well, I am spazzing out, kinda, but that's what's going on there. So just so you know. Okay, so we're studying like a thief in the night. And we've been studying we went through a lot of different things already when it comes down to this topic. Okay, there it goes. We come down to this topic, and we've been looking at the premillennial theory, and in essence, what we've been doing is showing how unbiblical it really is, and that is so much more simple than what it's presented as being. So anyway, that's what we're going to be talking about this morning. Eventually, we'll get to talking about Armageddon, okay? So let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll get rolling here. Our most loving and heavenly Father, we are so very thankful for your blessing us with the opportunity of being able to be here this morning, being able to open up your word and to study from it. We pray, Father, that you'll be with us this morning as we study, that you would open our hearts and our minds to some truths that we're going to be looking at, that we may be able to have a clear understanding of your words for us. We ask that you just be with us this morning. We thank you for your Son, Jesus. We are thankful for the grace and the mercy that we have received because of his sacrifice on the cross for us. And so for that, we give you our thanks. In the name of your Son, Jesus, amen. So we've been looking at this theory, and it really is just that, a theory. And as we've been looking at it, we started off by talking about the kingdom matters, and we said that in the premillennial theory is that the kingdom was not established when Jesus came to the earth, but that the people rejected him as being a king, and so instead of establishing his kingdom, he established the church. But we have seen through a study that we are already presently living in the kingdom, and we looked at Colossians, the first chapter, verses 13 and 14. And in that section of Scripture there, Paul simply says that we have been transferred out of the dominion of darkness and translated into the kingdom of his beloved Son. And we even looked over at Revelation, the first chapter, and saw that John said that he was a fellow partaker in the kingdom and in tribulation. So we looked at that and we said, well, no, the kingdom is already there and we're present citizens of that kingdom. Another thing that premillennial doctrine teaches in terms of a millennial kingdom coming is that before a great tribulation is to happen, that supposedly is supposed to last us for 7 years, that there would come a lot of signs. And so we looked at Mark, the 24th chapter, and we saw that Mark, the 24th chapter, really is from verses 1 all the way to verse 34, is really talking about the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem and Jerusalem itself. And so Jesus said, there are going to be those who are coming along and try to lead you astray by telling you about wars and rumors of wars and floods and earthquakes and famines and natural disasters and cataclysmic disasters like that. And that's going to be proof to you that the tribulation is on the way and that you need to get ready for it. But we saw that the signs that he's talking about were not those things. There was just simply one sign that Jesus said you need to watch out for, and that is when you see the army surrounding the city, you need to be leaving the city. Okay, you need to be getting out of town right now, because there's going to be a tribulation as something that you've never seen before. And I think I told you that when Rome surrounded the city of Jerusalem and sieged it, the people that tried to escape from it, a lot of them were caught, and they crucified them, so many that they almost ran out of wood. They were just all over the place, all over the hills around the city, Jews being crucified because of trying to escape from it. So it was a terrible thing, but that's not the sign that that the scriptures talk about. In fact, with the destruction of Jerusalem, there is one sign: armies are going to surround. With the second coming of Jesus, there are no signs. Jesus says, "Not even myself or the angels of heaven know when I'm going to come again." That's the Father only that knows about this. And then we looked at the rapture, and that was last week, and we saw that the rapture is something that is not really taught in the scriptures at all. Certainly there are not two resurrections that are taught, and then we spent some time talking about that. The week before, I think we talked about the Antichrist, and we saw from First John, the second chapter, that Antichrist has always been with us, okay? Anyone who is in opposition of Christ becomes an Antichrist. And so an Antichrist is not the boogie bear that's coming down the line that's going to lead the world into apostasy, but that the Antichrist has always been with us. It's not anything that is new. This morning, we're going to talk about Armageddon. And a lot of people are really interested in Armageddon. In fact, with all the recent events that have been happening geopolitically for the last probably 2 years, since Putin decided that he wanted to invade the Ukraine, there's been a lot of talk about World War III and Armageddon, and now with Israel attacking Iran and Iran shooting back at Israel. Then if you watch much of Facebook or even some news places, you'll see that they're talking a lot about the end of the world and Armageddon's on the way. And these are the signs that Jesus talked about and all that stuff. And so we're going to be talking about this idea of Armageddon and how does it really place in history, and what really is it about. So when you talk about the Battle of Armageddon, a lot of people will say, well, it's this apocalyptic a war at the end of time. It's a cosmic battle of the ages. And I just put down here, except it's not. But a lot of people are really pushing it because there's really some scary things about it. So what are some of the common meanings that you have heard bandied about when it comes down to Armageddon? Going to be a big fight. Yeah, it's going to be an apocalyptic fight. By the way, you remember that the word apocalyptic means just to reveal. It doesn't mean end times. It simply is a word that means to reveal or to unseal that which is revealed. That's all the word really means. And so it's going to be a big battle. What else have you heard? It's called what? Oh, okay. Megiddo. I didn't quite catch you at first. Megiddo. Yeah, Megiddo. Yeah. And so, yeah. Okay. So we're going to be talking about Megiddo here down the line here a little bit, so that you can understand what does this word Armageddon or Harmageddon mean, and how does it fit in Hebrew history or Israel history? What are some of the predictions about what will happen at the end of the world? Well, we talk about the premillennial doctrine says there are going to be signs, wars, rumors of wars. There's going to be famines and earthquakes and all kinds of terrible natural disasters that are going to happen. There's going to come an Antichrist on the scene. There's going to be a rapture. Antichrists are going to come on the scene. They're going to try to rebuild the temple. There's going to be a lot of upheaval over that, and that there are two Antichrists, one who is a Gentile Antichrist, the other which is a Jewish Antichrist, and they're going to be in opposition to one another, and they're going to lead and attack the Gentile Antichrist, who is going to be the head of the world order, is going to cause the Russians and the Arabs to go after Israel and Chinese. China is going to intervene in that with like 30 million soldiers, and they're all going to meet on the plain of Jezreel or Megiddo, and they're going to get into this huge, gigantic fight. And that will lead to the end of the world and Jesus coming again, okay? So that's some of the things. The world seems, when you hear this word Armageddon, I'm listening to Armageddon, the word seems to almost thunder doom and and destruction. That's what you think of when you think of Armageddon. So some believe that there's going to be this unprecedented battle involving hundreds of millions of soldiers, and that will bring the end of the world, and it will cause Jesus to intercede and to return for a second time, which we've already debunked in past classes, to establish a kingdom where he'll reign for 1,000 years. And Charles, not next week, but the week after, is going to be talking about that 1,000-year reign, and he's going to kind of undo that. The center of this global conflict is around the valley of Megiddo, or the Jezreel Valley. It's also called the Ezraelon Plain. Hal Lindsey, in his book Countdown to Armageddon, which he wrote in the early 80s, he says that when this giant clash on Megiddo happens, that a third of the world's population is going to be destroyed by a nuclear strike or nuclear war. And so he talks about this nuclear war that's happening, and that's what you're hearing a lot today. I mean, a lot of buzz, but it's not a new buzz. They were talking about this before all the way back in the Revolution. They were talking about this in the middle 1800s when the premillennial doctrine became vogue. Before that, it wasn't even taught, but it caught wind there, and it really gained a lot of speed. So they began to look at geopolitical things that are happening in the world, and they're saying that's talking about the end of the world. That's Armageddon. Then they talked about it during the Civil War, and then they talked about it in the Spanish-American War, and then they talked about it in the First World War, and then they talked about it in the Second World War, and everything in between since that time, which brings us to up into the 90s when Iraq I and Iraq II happened. And I remember Hal Lindsey being on a parapet in a hotel overlooking the city of Jerusalem when Saddam Hussein was launching Scud missiles into it, and he was saying, this is what Revelation has been talking about. We're on our way to Armageddon, only it didn't happen. And that's been, 30 years ago now, over 30 years ago. And now we're back in the same place where they're starting to talk about that same kind of thing once again. But here is the timeline that premillennials use as this idea of Armageddon. So the question is this: does the Bible teach such a view? Will a great battle between Russia and the Chinese and others in this age, and will it happen in our time? What does the Bible actually teach about Armageddon? Well, the book of Revelation is the only book that talks about Armageddon, okay? And it's mentioned over in the 16th chapter, okay? And it's only mentioned once in the Bible. Only once is it mentioned, and a whole doctrine has been built around that, pulling from this place and that place, pulling from Daniel and from Ezekiel and from other places to come to this final engagement, or this huge engagement called Armageddon or Harmageddon. So open your Bibles, if you will, to Revelation chapter 16. This is going to be a hard class. I can almost tell you that now. And the reason is because if you haven't been a student of Revelation, then you're going to find yourself a little bit lost. I'm just going to tell you that straight up, okay? I'll try to simplify it as much as possible. I would encourage you to. I've done several classes on the book of Revelation, and you might want to go to, we have the class archived on our website. And if you're a little bit confused after class, you can go to that website, and I take us from the very beginning and work all the way through the book of Revelation, and you'll be able to get some of the things that I'll be talking about this morning, and then you'll be able to get more definition to it, okay? Because we're just going to highlight some of these things. So listen to what he says here in chapter 16, beginning in verse 13. And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits like frogs. For they are spirits of demons, performing signs which go out to the kings of the whole world, to gather them together for the war of the great day of God the Almighty. Behold, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who says, awake and keep his garments, lest he walk about naked and men see his shame. And they gather them together in a place which in Hebrew is called Harmageddon. Okay, Harmageddon is important. The word har is the word that means the hill. And Megiddo is building on the idea of Megiddo. So the hill of Megiddo. And so as we go through, I'll start to kind of break that down. You'll be able to see a little bit what's going on here. So what are some key things that we need to remember when we're reading the book of Revelation? I think we just need to kind of establish some of this before we get all the way into it. Yeah. Okay, tell me your name again. Okay, Stephen. Stephen is visiting with us from Beaverton. Stephen says 70% of say that again, 70% of, yeah, 70% is drawn from the Old Testament, so it's going to ask us to be able to be familiar with it, okay? So what are some keys? Well, I think one of the first keys is to understand that the book of Revelation is written in apocalyptic literature or in symbolic or figurative literature, okay? In other words, it says that, but it means this. Or is it says this, but it means that. So I was asking Lori, because she's a better grammarian than I am, I said, which is correct grammatically? Is it says this, it means that, or it says that, it means this? Which is it, Charles? That one there, okay. So it says that, but it means this, okay? So it's going to say things that you think, okay, it says this, but here's what it really means, okay? Because it's a figurative. It's written primarily about events, okay? Events are going to happen, historically speaking, in the book of Revelation. And it's time sensitive. It says that it's to shortly come to pass. So it's not something that you're looking 2,000 or 3,000 years down the line in. Jesus is revealing to John. John is revealing to his readers, the Christian church in the late part of the first century and then on into the second, third century and forward, that there are some things that are going to happen in terms of these events, but these are to shortly take place. So they're very time sensitive. The readers, in other words, are probably going to expect to experience a good part of what he is trying to get across. So I think that's really important. The other thing is to remember that the book of Revelation is a book of comfort. Most times for the uninitiated, to look at the book of Revelation is a scary thing. When I was a new Christian and looking at the book of Revelation, it scared the fire out of me. It was intriguing as all, but it was scary because I didn't understand a lot of what was going on there, and the fact that I was tainted already by doing some reading from those who are premillennial or dispensational premillennialists, though I wasn't even able to pronounce the word back then, nor did I understand it, but it scared me. So I was reading books like from Curlin Salem, and I was looking at Hal Lindsey's books and Jenkins' books and those kind of guys, and so it was scary. But the book of Revelation is not about those things. Really, the book of Revelation is about comforting the readers that are getting ready to go into some persecution and to let them know that, listen, you're not the defeated. You're actually the victors. Stay strong. Trust in me, okay? So the book of Revelation tells a story, what it is. And the story is like a play or a drama that unfolds, okay? So the real cast of characters is hidden by making each of them appear in some symbolic form. So it says that, but it means this. And so you got to be able to read between the lines, and the readers of Jesus' day would have been able to do so. It's harder for us because we're not used to looking at symbolic literature or apocalyptic literature. We're used to looking at things literally speaking. And when John writes, he's going to use a lot of figures, but they're going to get it. They're going to understand it, and they're going to be able to understand what is going on. Sometimes today, when one writes a comic strip or a political cartoon, they will use that. Well, like what? Democrats are represented by what? Donkeys. Okay, so that's the Democratic symbol. And so when you see a donkey and it's dressed in red, white, and blue, then you're going to make the connection that it's talking about Democrats. Or if you're talking about Republicans, they're represented by an elephant. Okay, and when it's in red, white, and blue, it's talking about a political segment of our Constitution or our republic. Okay, so you understand those kinds of things. So in like a real drama, the real characters are hidden, making each one of them appear in some kind of symbolic form. So in Revelation presents key players in such symbols, it gives enough clues that you can begin to recognize them, and they would have back then. It's to conceal a message from the enemies of the church, but reveal what is happening to Christians. That's what Revelation is, okay? Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, so Steve was saying that when he said 70% of a lot of the stuff that is written, taken from the Old Testament into Revelation, is symbolic language even there. Apocalyptic literature even there that is brought over here. Says that, but it means this, okay? So who are the key characters in the book of Revelation? Well, I really didn't want you to see that yet. So from past class, can you remember some of the key characters in the book of Revelation? You read about them, 3 of them already, when we read Revelation 16 and Revelation 16 and verse 16. You've already seen them, but what are some of the characters that are in the book of Revelation? Okay, there's going to be a dragon, there's a beast, false prophet, which is a second beast, okay. Frogs. Yeah, there's all these different characters that are brought to light, and so it's important that we understand it. So you have a red dragon, you have a 7-headed beast, you have a false prophet that's like a lamb, you have a prostitute that rides on the back of a beast, or like Satan. There is a man that's dressed in white who holds in his hand 7 stars and is walking among 7 lampstands. And so we learned that the stars are the prayers, the lampstands are the church, But we see that. We see a lamb that is powerful, wears a crown, and is a lamb that was slain before the foundation of the world. Some other figures is the 4 horsemen of Revelation, or the 7 trumpets calling Rome to change her ways, 7 bowls of judgment or punishment that is coming upon, I believe, Rome. You have those kinds of symbolic things that are pictured there. And so they can become, somewhat challenging. So John wrote the book in a highly symbolic language in order to both reveal to his readers a message of final and ultimate victory of the church in the midst of extreme persecution soon to come upon the church emanating from the Roman Empire, but also to conceal from the enemy their ultimate destruction. So God is going to take these guys apart. They're going to be persecuting the church, but at the end, the church is going to win. At the end, those who have persecuted are going to be vindicated. And you might remember briefly Revelation, the 6th chapter. There you find below the throne of God myriads of people there that we learn are the martyrs that come out of the tribulation. And they're asking God, how long is this going to go on before you do something about this? Okay, that's paraphrased, but that's the gist of it. And God says, here's a white robe, be patient. You'll be vindicated. Okay, you'll be taken care of here. Okay, so what's going on here in Revelation 16? What's happening? I mean, what terms or characters in this passage appear to have symbolic meaning? Okay, what's happening here? And because it's couched really in verse 16, because in verse 16 is where you hear the word Armageddon. So what's happening? Well, you have a dragon. Okay, so in the book of Revelation, who is the dragon? Did someone say something? Yeah, it's the devil. It's Satan, and we know that from chapter 12 and verse 9, where the dragon is introduced, okay? And he's got 10 heads and all that kind of stuff, and he is fierce, but he's a dragon, okay? And in chapter 20 and verse 2, it tells us that we're talking about Satan here. So Satan is a dragon, and the dragon is all about doing war with the church. He's trying to destroy the church. Well, he first tried to destroy Jesus, okay, but wasn't able to do so. He wasn't able to keep him from making his sacrifice. He wasn't able to keep him from going to heaven and taking his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. He wasn't able to do that. And when he couldn't do that, he turns his attention to the church. And now he's going to try to destroy the church, okay? kill the church. And to do so, he's going to use some allies that are going to come on his side, okay? And so that brings us to the next one that's in verse 16, and that is the first beast. And this is a seven-headed beast. And you'll find him over in Daniel, the 7th chapter, as the same beast. And this beast is extremely powerful. And I believe that he is symbolic of the worldwide political kingdom that persecuted the church in John's day and would continue historically to go on for about the next 3 to 4 centuries, where he's going to be busy with probably Trajan, the Roman emperor, being probably, well, you obviously has Nero, and then you have Domitian, who is known as the bloody arm of Nero, which meant if Nero was bad and killed Christians, remember, after he burned Rome, he burned Christians, and they had him in Colosseums, destroying them. And then Domitian comes along, and he was worse because he demands people worship him as God. And almost all the emperors were like that eventually, leading up to Trajan. And Trajan probably was one of the very worst, that he's got Christians being taken into Colosseums and eaten alive by wild animals and torn to pieces and crucified and burned and all kinds of terrible things. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so he's talking about Nero was committed suicide, okay? And then when Domitian came along, not everyone bought that. They believed that Domitian was like the reincarnation of Nero because he was as bad as Nero, but he was much worse in terms of how aggressive he went after the kingdom, where he demanded that cities worshiped him and recognized him as God. And so when you read Revelation, Revelation was written to the 7 churches of Asia. Okay, and in all those cities in Asia that they were written to, where the church was, the vast majority had emperor worship as a major part of what that city was about. And any Christian that refused to bow down and burn incense and worship him and receive a mark of the beast, they're in big trouble. Okay, they're going to be persecuted and killed. So the first beast, is powerful, and he would go after the Christians, and the Christians of that day would understand exactly what's going on here. Us, we sat there and go, well, who is this beast? But the Christians back then, they would know what he was talking about. It means this, it says this, but it means that, and they would put those things together. And we learn most about this third beast from Revelation, the 13th chapter. So if you want to open your Bibles to Revelation chapter 13, you can get a good idea of what's to some degree what's going on. For instance, the beast has 7 heads and 10 horns. And so like the fourth beast of Daniel 7, it represents a coming world empire. So remember, when you talk about Daniel 7, he's talking about the 4 kingdoms. And of the 4 kingdoms that he is talking about here with Babylon, Assyria, the Medes and the Persians, and the Greeks, and then the Romans, then you see how the Romans fit very well into that 4th person. So the dragon, he's going to give this beast a great amount of power, verse 2 says. He's going to give him a lot of power. And that beast is going to blaspheme God. He's going to dishonor God. He's going to say, there is no God but one God, and that's the emperor, okay? The beast is going to make war against the saints. That's what it says there, is that he's going to go after the saints. He's going to go after the church, and he's going to rule the nations. And of course, Rome, when it was in power, it ruled the world, at least the known world. There are those who are known as the barbarians. We're talking about, the Vikings and the Goths and the Visigoths. And of course, if you were to go deeper into Asia, as they began to make encroaches towards Europe, then you have the Mongols, okay? But they were considered as being barbarians, and they were not considered as being people who, what's the word that I want? What's the opposite of being a barbarian? Yeah, they were civilized. They weren't seen that way. The civilized world was ruled by Rome. So whatever Rome said, it happened. And it's a lot like us today. Whatever America says, well, not so much, but there was a time when whatever American said, everyone jumped, Now people are not jumping as fast. But nevertheless, even today, America still wields a lot of power because it's economic engine. We're strong economically and we're strong militarily, okay? So when we speak, a lot of people jump. Well, back in that day, when Rome spoke, everyone jumped. Everyone listened because they depended on Rome and their economy, because their economic engine ran the world. It affected all the other nations as well. So that's the first beast. And so I believe that the first beast is talking about the empire itself, okay? And that Satan is going to use the empire to try to extinguish Christianity. That's what he is about. Then you have a second beast. And that's what he talks about here. There'll be this first beast. There's going to be a second beast. And he's also called a false prophet. So who is he? Well, the second beast has two horns like a lamb. He is on the side of the first beast of Satan. He's going to be serving the first beast, in other words. And the second beast seeks to make everybody worship the first beast. Actually, the heads of the first beast, which are the emperors themselves. And so it's really talking about cult emperor worship that's going on here, okay? And so you have Satan, who hates God and hates Christ and hates the church. He's going to try to extinguish it off the face of the planet. He's going to use the Roman Empire to do that, symbolized by the first beast. In order to make that happen, he's going to use emperor worship as a means of persecuting the church and calling them guilty. So if you don't worship Caesar, you're going to die. You're going to be persecuted. You're going to be punished. And in that day, a lot of them were because of that. So the heads of the first beast represent emperors of the Roman Empire. The second beast promotes worship of the Roman empires, and that's why he's called a prophet, a false prophet, because prophets are equaled with religion. So they're going to make emperor worship a religion that the citizens of Rome are expected to bow down to and to worship, to pay homage to. And anyone that doesn't, like I said, is going to be in trouble. So to do this, the second beast sets up images of the empire. And I thought about throwing up a map of the 7 churches of Asia, but you're smart people and you can visualize that in your head. Though in Asia and all those churches that were Sardis and Smyrna and Thyatira and Philadelphia and all those, Ephesus, you'll see them there, okay? And they're going to be large markets for emperor worship. So the images are set up there, and persecution is going to begin to happen in those places. So the second beast represents those who sought to enforce the worship of the Roman emperors. So the second beast is the cult of emperor worship. So it says that, but it means this, okay? And the Romans, when they're reading this, the world, when they're reading this, they're not going to have a clue. But these Jewish Christians will have a real big clue because they can remember back. Okay, Lindsay? Okay, say that a little bit louder, use your preacher voice. Okay. Okay. Okay, well, she's talking about how would this affect the European view of religion and the movement of religion through it. For sure, when the church is being persecuted, the church probably grew its greatest during the years of persecution, surprisingly. You would have thought that the persecution by Rome would have pushed the church underground. But it didn't. Well, yeah, I know they worship in catacombs and things like that, but they advanced, and the church grew even in the midst of the great persecutions that were happening back then. And so it did grow, and it did advance because of that very thing. And so they became roads in the empire that led to the gospel being spread in some pretty incredible ways. So all these three see God unleash forces to bring down the Roman Empire. the persecutor. And so they get together and they decide they're going to resist God's plan. When you begin to look at Revelation and you begin to look at the seven trumpets are trying to get the attention of the Gentile people, the Roman people, to turn towards God. They're trying to get them, but they won't listen to the trumpets. And as a result of not listening to the trumpets, bowls of punishment are going to be poured out upon them. There will be 7 bowls, and this 16th chapter is part of those bowls that are being poured out. And the idea is that the punishment is going to be so strong that it's going to be extremely destructive to Rome. And Rome was undone that way. If you look at the history of Rome, you'll see how they become morally degenerate, socially degenerate. You'll see how they began to push their kingdom out in England and tried to go into Europe, and in doing so, the Visigoths, the Germanic tribes, Viking tribes, all of them pushed back hard and pushed them back. And not only did they push them back, they began to make inroads into the kingdom itself. So they're undoing the Roman Empire, and after a period of time, eventually, that's exactly what happens to the empire. It becomes completely destroyed from within, morally speaking, and from without, as the world comes after them, okay? To the point that they're so destroyed that those allies that they have are starting to back away from Rome. They don't want to be tainted by knowing Rome, because to know Rome was to become an enemy of these others, so they're being destroyed. Steve. 78, 70, uh-huh. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. As you continue on reading down from verse 16 and down, you'll see all the destructive things that are coming at him. And so God doesn't just use armies to bring down Rome. He uses natural disasters. He uses fires. He uses earthquakes. He uses volcanoes. And Steve mentioned Mount Vesuvius that oversaw Pompey, who was named after the Roman general Pompey, who later became a Roman emperor. Pompey is completely destroyed by Vesuvius. And you probably have read history about that, how they were destroyed in like a blink of an eye. Bodies were entombed in their just normal positions. But anyway, when these three, when Rome sees that they're being undone, okay, they begin to do something about it, okay? And so the resistance is symbolized by them saying that they need to gather their forces at Armageddon. We need to gather, we need to resist, and we need to fight. Okay, and the next question you're going to have is, who are these frogs? Notice that it says that the frogs come out of their mouths. It comes out of the mouth of the dragon and out of the beast. It comes out of their mouth. And so what do the frogs represent? Well, the frogs represent messengers that they would send to bring news to all their vassal kings all over the world that a time has come for them to resist the growing threats of the empire. Okay, so the frogs are nothing more than messengers. Now, they're demonic and they're terrible because where do they come from? They come from the mouths of demonic beings, okay? From a demonic world empire, from a demonic cult worship from Satan himself. And so they go out with a message, and the message is, all you people who are on our side, you need to come to us. And we need to resist, okay? Understand he's not talking about a literal thing. He's talking about a spiritual thing that's going on here, okay? But it's between God and Satan is the fight, okay? And there are some pawns that are caught up in the midst of it. But this growing threat is there, and so they're going to try to rally the troops. So symbolically, the characters, the dragon is Satan, the seven-headed beast is Rome, the two-headed beast is the false prophet, cult emperor worship, the frogs are messengers that are sent out. It means that, but it says that, but it means this. Okay, is what's going on here. That brings you to Armageddon. How does Armageddon fit into all of of this. I got to really start making some moving. So just as these things are symbolic, Armageddon is symbolic. Just like dragons and beasts and frogs are symbolic, Armageddon is symbolic. So it says that, but it means this, okay? So the Revelation, the time is sensitive, as we already said. It would include a battle of Armageddon in a short period of time. So we're not talking thousands of years down the line, as premillennialists want us to think. It's talking about something that's going to happen that even those alive maybe even witness to, okay? So Jesus was either sure of these events that were happening in Revelation or he is mistaken. And Jesus is never mistaken, okay? So what place does this word Armageddon have in connection? Well, as I mentioned to you, Megiddo oversees the Ezra-Elam Valley. It's where Solomon put his chariot fortresses. And the thought was that whoever controlled the hill of Megiddo controlled the Ezra-Elam Valley. Because whenever invading forces from the north or anyone else ever came, they always came across the Jordan River, cut through the Ezra-Elam Valley or the Jezreel Valley, and cut the country in half. And then they would conquer from north to south, okay? So Megiddo becomes a large extent of the Ezra-Elam plain or valley. And it's here where some of the most famous battles in the Old Testament ever took place. Huge battles took place in the Ezra-Elam Valley. So the hillside town was called Megiddo. Most commentators on Revelation agree that the expression of referring to Megiddo and the area around it included the plain of the Ezra-Elam or the plain of Jezreel, which were all important battles that led up even as early as the Second World War, where they did great take battles on the Ezra-Elam Valley. I've been there several times. I'm going to tell you, there's no way you can get 30 million people on the Ezra-Elam Valley. There is no way, Jose. It can never happen. It's just not that, it's too small. So here's a picture of it that you can kind of get an idea. From Mount Carmel going down to Beit Shan is where the valley is. And there's Megiddo right there. I've been there as well, okay? So if you can control Megiddo, you control the valley. And so when you talk about Armageddon or Hill of Megiddo, it's talking about a great place of critical battles happening. Well, let me just go forward here. A lot of important battles happened there. Deborah and Barak defeated Sisera, who was a general for Jabin, who was the king of Canaan, okay? And they destroyed him, and Jael puts a tent peg through his head. Okay, so on the Ezra-Elam Valley or Jezreel Valley happened. Gideon defeated the Midianites there with his 300 men, as many as the sand of the seashores. They were destroyed right over by Nain, which is north side of the Jezreel Valley. Saul and Jonathan defeat the Philistines. Saul and Jonathan are killed on Mount Gilboa in a battle with the Philistines, and they take their bodies and nail them to the walls of Beit Shan. Okay, and then later David goes down there and gets them. Both kings Ahaziah and Josiah were slain there. Josiah disguised himself and went out against the Egyptians, and an Egyptian with a bow shot him and went through a chink in his armor and pierced him, and he died. So, and Josiah was a great king, by the way, but he died there, okay? So all I'm saying is that when you hear the word Megiddo for the Hebrews, they're going to know this is a place where great battles, it is prominent in their history for them to think about that place. So why modern-day battlefields have such symbolic meaning? Well, I was going to let you say, but we don't have time. Waterloo. That's when Wellington went up against Napoleon. And everyone thought Napoleon was going to dust Wellington, and Wellington wins. That turned things all the way around. Gettysburg, okay, that battle between the Federalists and the Confederates. They said that was the turning of the Civil War. Pearl Harbor, that was the beginning of the Second World War and us entering into the Second World War. Normandy, that's when we properly went into Normandy and took out eventually the Germans. So all these conjure up thoughts of critical battles, and it would be the same for these people here. When they read a battle of Armageddon, they're going to say, okay, we're talking about a huge battle, a critical battle that's going to take place. So it is this very symbolic sense which must be recognized if we're to understand John's use of the term Armageddon. The forces of the Roman Empire represented by the first and second beasts who serve Satan that are pictured as gathering her allies to resist God's plan. The fight between God and Satan here are not a physical war near Megiddo. The conflict, rather, is one of a spiritual nature. Satan and his forces who are being used by Satan to extinguish the church and Christians are defeated by God. That's what that's about. God wins, Satan loses. The theme of Revelation is Christians ultimately are the victors. The emphasis then of Armageddon is the beginning of the end of the Roman Empire has nothing to do with a great physical World War III battle that ushers in the end of time. In fact, events or signs, including the Battle of Armageddon leading up to Christ's second coming, are counter to what Jesus and as well as other New Testament teachers communicate. For instance, if the New Testament teaches anything about the second coming of Christ, it teaches that it will come unexpectedly, not with some great physical battle. In fact, the most frequent descriptions of his coming is he'll come like a thief in the night. And no one knows when the thief's coming. No one knows. Matthew 24 and verse 36, Jesus said, when I come, I don't even know. The angels don't know. Only God knows. So there's not going to be any sign of his second coming. It's just going to come, and you better be ready for it. So the common expression about the end of the world is that it will come unexpectedly. And that's what 2 Peter 3 says. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, when the heavens will pass away with a roar, the heavenly bodies will be burned up and dissolved, and the earth and all of its works that are done will be exposed. Or 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 2, for you yourselves are fully aware that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. The end. So that's what Armageddon is. Armageddon is not, I just can't, it's not this geopolitical giant battle. That's not what it's about. It's about a spiritual war that you as Christians win. We win. Okay? All right, class is yours and your thoughts along with them.